The coffee at the Speedway on Route 36 always tasted like burnt pennies, but I drank it anyway because the alternative was falling asleep at the throttle. 23 years running freight for BNSF, and I still couldn't get used to the midnight shifts. Probably never would. My ex-wife used to say I was stubborn that way. Stubborn about coffee, stubborn about staying in Hayes when there was better money in Topeka, stubborn about taking care of Dad when she thought we should have put him in a home 3 years ago. Maybe she was right. Hell, she was definitely right about the home thing, but I wasn't going to be the one to sign those papers. I was fourth in line at the counter when my phone buzzed. Dispatch. Never good news at 11:47 p.m. Whitaker. I answered, still holding my place in line. Grant, we need you on the 2319 out of Salina. Jimmy Kowalski called in sick. Food poisoning or something. Train's already loaded, just needs an engineer. I rubbed my eyes. The 2319 was a long haul, mixed freight, mostly AG supplies headed to the distribution center in Garden City. What's the cargo manifest? Grain hoppers, tankers with anhydrous ammonia, couple flatbeds with equipment. And there's a special cargo car, some kind of livestock feed from Agrigenesis. They've got a rep riding along to monitor temperature controls. Agrigenesis, the big experimental farm operation north of Salina. They've been in the news. Something about revolutionary feed supplements that could double cattle weight gain. Dad had mentioned it, said it sounded like science fiction bullshit to him, but what did he know? He still thought GPS was witchcraft. Fine, I'll be there in 40. I hung up and stepped out of line. The coffee could wait. The 2319 was already idling when I pulled into the Salina yard, a mile-long snake of steel catching sodium vapor light. I did my walk-around check, wheels, couplers, air brake connections. Everything looked solid, which was more than I could say for the Agrigenesis rep waiting by the special cargo car. She was young 30-ish, maybe wearing a company windbreaker and holding a tablet, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes had that red-rimmed look people get when they've been staring at screens too long. "You're the engineer?" she asked. "Grant Whitaker." I didn't offer my hand. "You're babysitting the mystery cargo." Dr. Sarah Chun. And it's not a mystery. It's AG-17, a prion-based nutritional catalyst. Completely revolutionary, completely safe. She said it like she was reading from a press release. I just need to monitor the refrigeration unit every hour. Standard protocol. Prion. I knew that word. Mad cow disease. Brain-eating proteins. That's safe. Completely inert in this form. It only activates in bovine digestive systems. Think of it like a key that only fits one lock. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I've been overseeing transport for 6 months. Never had an issue. I nodded, not entirely convinced, but it wasn't my job to question cargo. My job was to get the train from point A to point B without derailing, catching fire, or running over some drunk idiot parked on the tracks. You riding in the engine or the cargo car? Cargo car. There's a monitoring station inside. Suit yourself. We leave in 10. The first hour was uneventful. The 2319 ran smooth, 67 cars stretching behind me through flat Kansas darkness. Wheat fields on both sides, endless and black under a quarter moon. I'd grown up in these plains. My grandfather had farmed section land near Waukene until the '02 drought broke him, and I still couldn't shake the feeling that the flatness was unnatural, like God had taken a rolling pin to the world and pressed it too hard. The radio crackled. "Whitaker, this is Chun. First check complete. Temperature holding at -4 Celsius. Copy that." I glanced at the GPS. We were passing through Ellis County, maybe 20 miles from Hayes. Dad would be asleep by now. I'd promised to stop by tomorrow afternoon, help him with his prescriptions. He kept mixing up the pill bottles, taking his blood pressure meds at night and his sleeping pills in the morning. Stubborn old man. Wonder where I got it from. At mile marker 187, the rail bed started vibrating wrong. I'd felt bad track before. Washouts, shifted ballast, frost heaves in winter. This was different. The vibration came in waves, like the rails themselves were shivering. I throttled back, watching the speedometer drop from 45 to 35. Dispatch, this is Whitaker on the 2319. I'm feeling some instability on the tracks. Coordinates. I checked the GPS north of Yosemento. Recommend inspection before you run any more trains through here. Copy 2319. We'll flag it for the track crew. You good to proceed? Yeah, I'll keep her slow. I didn't like it, but the alternative was stopping a mile-long freight train in the middle of nowhere and waiting 6 hours for an inspection crew. BNSF didn't pay overtime for caution. The shaking got worse. I was reaching for the air brake when the world turned sideways. Later, much later, I'd see the NTSB report. A sinkhole had opened beneath the tracks, probably from an old limestone mine collapse. The lead engine missed it by 15 feet. Car 16 through 23 didn't. I felt the weight shift first, that sickening lurch when the train's center of gravity does something physics says it shouldn't. Then came the sound. Metal screaming against metal, couplers snapping like gunshots, the deep bass roar of grain hoppers tearing open and spilling 10,000 bushels of wheat across the prairie. I slammed the emergency brake and killed the throttle, but momentum doesn't care about brakes. The engine shuddered, fishtailed, and then mercifully stayed on the tracks. Behind me, I could hear the cars jackknifing, crumpling, rolling. When the noise finally stopped, I sat in the sudden silence, hands shaking on the dead man's switch. The radio crackled. Whitaker, respond. I'm here. My voice sounded strange in my own ears. Dispatch, we've had a derailment. Multiple cars. I need emergency response immediately. Copy. Location. I gave him the coordinates, then grabbed my flashlight and stumbled out of the engine. The damage was biblical. 7 cars had derailed completely, twisted into shapes that locomotives were never meant to make. 2 grain hoppers had ruptured, burying the tracks in a mountain of wheat. One of the anhydrous ammonia tankers had cracked. I could smell the sharp reek of it already, making my eyes water. And at the center of the wreckage, split open like a rotted fruit, was the Agri-Genesis cargo car. The refrigeration unit was still running, pumping out clouds of vapor that glowed white in my flashlight beam. But the containment vessel inside had shattered. I could see it through the torn metal, a massive steel cylinder cracked down the middle, leaking a thick amber fluid that steamed when it hit the cold air. Dr. Chun, I shouted. Chun, you in there? Nothing. I climbed over twisted metal, trying to reach the cargo car's access door. It was jammed, bent inward by the impact. I could see movement inside through the broken wall. Someone stumbling, backlit by emergency lights. Chun, can you hear me? The figure lurched toward the opening. It was her, but something was wrong with the way she moved. Jerky, uncoordinated. Don't, she gasped. Don't touch the feed. AG 17. It's not supposed to. She collapsed before finishing the sentence. I reached through the gap, managed to grab her jacket, and hauled her through the opening. She was breathing, but her pupils were dilated, unfocused. In the flashlight beam, I could see what looked like a rash spreading up her neck, angry red welts that hadn't been there an hour ago. Dispatch, I said into the radio, I need medical evacuation. 1 injured, possible chemical exposure. And you need to contact Agri-Genesis immediately. Their experimental cargo is compromised. Copy. Emergency response is en route. ETA 25 minutes. 25 minutes. I looked at Chun, really looked at her. The rash was spreading faster now, crawling up her jaw toward her face. Her breathing had gone shallow and rapid. And beyond the wreckage, carried by the night wind, I could see the amber fluid from the shattered container spreading across the wheat field, soaking into the earth where my grandfather had once planted his crops. 25 minutes suddenly felt like a very long time. The EMTs arrived at 1:47 a.m. in a convoy of flashing lights that turned the crash site into a disco from hell. I dragged Chin away from the wreckage, trying to keep her warm with my jacket while that rash continued its march across her skin. By the time the paramedics reached us, it had covered half her face. Chemical exposure, I told them, stepping back. Something called AG-17. Prion-based, she said. It's all over the wreck. The lead paramedic, Harris, according to his name tag, took one look at Chun and called for a hazmat team. Within minutes, people in white suits were swarming the derailment, setting up containment zones and testing equipment. I tried calling Dad. No answer. Probably had his hearing aids out, sleeping through the end of the world like he'd slept through my divorce, Mom's funeral, and every other crisis that didn't involve his morning coffee. I left a voicemail, Dad. It's Grant. Train derailed, I'm okay. Might be late tomorrow. Don't forget your meds. A man in a suit appeared at my elbow. No hazmat gear, just slacks and a company jacket with a BNSF logo. Tom Vickers, Division Superintendent. I met him twice before, both times when someone else had screwed up. Whitaker, walk me through what happened. I explained the track instability, the sinkhole, the cascade of failures that turn a routine freight run into a contaminated nightmare. Vickers listened with the expression of a man calculating how many zeros would be on the insurance claim. This agrigenesis cargo, he said, you knew what you were hauling. Livestock feed, experimental. The rep said it was safe. The rep is currently seizing in the back of an ambulance. Vickers checked his phone. I've got corporate on my ass, I've got agrigenesis on my ass, and I got a contamination zone that might stretch for miles if this shit gets into the groundwater. I need you to stay put until someone from agrigenesis arrives to assess the situation. I need to check on my father. He's in Hayes alone. Not going anywhere until we clear you medically. Vickers softened slightly. Look, Grant, I get it. But if you were exposed to whatever's in that cargo car, you could be carrying it with you. We do this by the book. By the book. That's what got us here in the first place, following protocols, hauling mystery cargo, trusting that the people who loaded the train knew what they were doing. I was about to argue when a new voice cut through the chaos. Where's the engineer? I need to speak with the engineer immediately. The man approaching looked like every corporate crisis manager I'd ever met. Expensive glasses, tablet in hand, that particular brand of controlled panic that came from knowing your company's stock price was about to crater. His badge said, Dr. Michael Reeves, Agrigenesis Emergency Response. You Whitaker, he asked. That's me. Dr. Sarah Chun, the rep you were transporting. What's her condition? Unconscious, covered in some kind of rash, possibly seizing. Your people want to explain what the hell we were actually hauling. Reeves glanced at Vickers, then back at me. AG-17 is a prion-based growth catalyst. Under controlled conditions, it's completely stable. But if the containment is breached and the solution is exposed to certain environmental conditions, temperature fluctuation, organic matter, bacterial contamination, it can become active. Active how? It begins replicating. And unlike normal prion, which take years to cause symptoms, AG-17 was engineered for rapid metabolic integration. Hours, not years. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. You're telling me this stuff is infectious. Not through casual contact, but if it enters the bloodstream, or if someone inhales aerosolized particles, or ingests contaminated material. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. How much spilled? Approximately 4,000 liters. The wind is carrying it northeast across the wheat fields. We're trying to establish a contamination radius now. Northeast. Toward Hayes. Toward Dad. I need to leave, I said. Now. You were at ground zero, Reeves said. You need to be examined. My father is 78 years old, lives alone, and probably has every window in his house open because he's too cheap to run the AC. If this shit is airborne, he's breathing it right now. Vickers and Reeves exchanged looks. The kind of looks that told me whatever they were about to say, I wasn't going to like it. "Grant," Vickers said carefully, "we've already contacted local authorities in Hayes. They're implementing shelter-in-place protocols. Your father will be fine." Shelter in place. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You know what Dad does when someone tells him to shelter in place? He goes outside to see what the fuss is about. He's probably standing on his porch right now, watching the sky turn red and wondering why the wheat smells funny. "We have teams." "I'm going." I started toward my truck. Vickers grabbed my arm. "You're not thinking clearly. If you were exposed, you could spread the contamination." I shook him off. "Then quarantine me after I get my father to safety. But I'm not leaving him alone out there." Behind us, someone screamed. It was one of the hazmat workers stumbling away from the wreckage. His suit was torn at the shoulder, caught on twisted metal, probably, and his face had gone pale. "I touched it," he said, voice high and thin. "The solution. It got on my skin. Oh God, I touched it." Harris rushed over with a decontamination kit, but I could already see the red welts forming on the man's neck. Just like Chun, spreading fast. "How long?" I asked Reeves. "From exposure to symptoms." "How long?" "In the animal trials, 30 to 40 minutes. The hazmat worker had been in the containment zone for maybe 15 minutes. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. Reeves was typing frantically on his tablet. "We need to expand the quarantine zone. Everyone within 5 miles of the derailment needs to be tested. And we need to contact the CDC. "The CDC is 4 hours away," Vickers snapped. "We need to contain this now before." His phone rang. He answered, listened, and his face went gray. "There's been an incident at a farm 3 miles northeast of here. Miller's Place. The farmer called 911, saying his livestock were acting strange. By the time the county sheriff arrived, the farmer was having seizures. 3 miles northeast. The wind direction. The contaminated feed carried across the fields like invisible snow." I thought about Dad's house, 7 miles beyond that. Thought about his morning routine. Up at 5 a.m., coffee on the porch, checking the wheat prices in the paper like he still had a crop to sell. Breathing deep lungfuls of Kansas air. Reeves was making phone calls, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Yes, immediate aerial survey. I need thermal imaging of the contamination spread. And give me a direct line to Fort Riley. We might need military assistance for quarantine enforcement." Military assistance. Quarantine enforcement. Words that sounded like they belonged in a movie, not in the middle of the Kansas plains at 2 a.m. Another call came in, then another. More reports of livestock acting erratically. A farmhand at the Peterson place vomiting blood. A truck driver on Route 70 who'd stopped to help what he thought was a car accident found 3 people in the wheat field, twitching. The contamination was spreading faster than anyone had predicted. Vickers pulled me aside, away from the chaos. "Grant, I need you to listen to me. In about 30 minutes, there's going to be a federal response team here. When that happens, this entire area becomes a restricted zone. They will not let you leave. They will not make exceptions for family emergencies. If you're going to get your father, you need to go now." "I thought you said." I said what I had to say in front of corporate and emergency response. But off the record, if it was my father, I'd already be halfway to Hayes. He glanced at Reeves, who was still on his phone. "Take the back roads. Avoid checkpoints. And Grant, if you or your father show any symptoms, the rash, fever, confusion, you need to call in immediately. Don't try to hide it." I nodded, already moving toward my truck. "Whitaker." Vickers's voice stopped me. "The contamination radius is expanding at roughly 2 miles per hour. That gives you maybe 3 hours before it reaches your father's house. After that..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I drove. The back roads were empty at 2:30 a.m., just me and the cicadas and the endless dark wheat. I kept the radio on, scanning through channels, trying to get information. Most stations were still running regular programming. Late-night talk shows, classic country, ads for tractor parts. But on AM 1240, someone was reading an emergency alert. Advise all residents in Ellis County to remain indoors with windows and doors sealed. Do not approach anyone exhibiting unusual behavior. Do not consume local water supplies. Federal Emergency Management is coordinating with local authorities to establish safe zones. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Not a drill. 23 years hauling freight, and I'd never heard those words on the radio. Not even during the tornado warnings in '04, or the ice storms that shut down half the state in '19. My phone rang. Dad, finally. Grant, what the hell is going on? I've got sirens, helicopters, and some jackass from the county sheriff's office banging on my door telling me to seal my windows. I thought you said this was a train derailment. Relief washed over me. He sounded normal. Pissed off and confused, but normal. No slurred speech, no fever, no signs of the thing that had turned Dr. Chun into a seizing wreck. Dad, listen to me carefully. There was a derailment, yes, but one of the cargo containers ruptured. The contents are dangerous, potentially airborne. You need to stay inside. I'm 78 years old. I've survived 3 wives, 2 market crashes, and that time a tornado took half my barn while I was still in it. I'm not hiding in my house because of some train spill. Dad, besides, the wheat's been smelling funny all night. Went out to check it maybe an hour ago. Thought maybe someone's septic tank ruptured, or some kids were burning trash in the fields. You know how those Peterson boys are. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. You went outside into the fields. Just the edge, by the fence line. Why, what's wrong with? Did you touch anything, the wheat, the soil? I touched the fence post, same as I've been touching for 40 years. Grant, you're scaring me. Weren't you telling me? I could see the glow of haze in the distance now, that familiar orange haze from the Walmart parking lot lights. I'm 10 minutes away. Don't go outside again. Don't drink the tap water. And if you start feeling strange, dizzy, feverish, anything, you tell me immediately. Okay. A pause. You think I've been exposed to something? I don't know. That's why I'm coming to get you. Where are we going? Good question. The contamination was spreading northeast, which meant Hayes was already in the danger zone. South would take us toward Garden City, maybe outrun the spread, but the roads would be clogged with everyone else who'd had the same idea. West toward Colorado. My phone beeped. Text from Vickers, federal quarantine effective in 90 minutes. Interstate 70 closed. All highways out of Ellis County closing sequentially. 90 minutes, and I was still 8 miles from Dad's house. I pressed the accelerator to the floor. Dad was waiting on the porch when I pulled up, shotgun cradled in his arms like he was expecting raiders instead of Pryon. He'd always been like that. Depression-era mentality, trust no one, prepare for the worst. What's with the gun, I asked, climbing out of the truck. County sheriff showed up half an hour ago. Wouldn't tell me what was happening, just kept saying to stay inside. Then I heard helicopters. Lots of them. Military transport birds by the sound of it. He squinted at me. You look like hell. Long night. I grabbed his go bag from inside. We prepared it after Mom died, back when we thought the biggest emergency we'd face was a hospital trip. We need to leave. Now. I'm not leaving my house. Dad, this is my land. Your grandfather's land. I'm not running because some government bureaucrat says there's danger. I've lived through danger before. Not like this. I showed him my phone, the emergency alerts scrolling past. There's a contamination event. Chemical, maybe biological. It's spreading fast and it's killing people. We have maybe an hour before the roads are locked down. He stared at the screen, jaw working. Then quietly the wheat smell. That's it. Probably. And I went into the field. You said you just touched the fence post. I walked maybe 20 feet in, wanted to see if it was coming from the irrigation ditch. He met my eyes. So if it's airborne like you say, I breathed it in, which means I'm already contaminated. No, he couldn't be. Dad, we don't know that. You might be fine. And if I'm not, you want to drag me out of here, expose everyone we pass, maybe infect you. In the process, he set the shotgun down carefully. Son, I appreciate you coming, but I'm not leaving. I'm not letting you die alone in this house. Then I guess you're staying too. He turned and walked inside, leaving me standing in the gravel driveway with 90 minutes on the clock and no good options. I called Vickers. I've got a situation. Whitaker, please tell me you're not still in Hayes. My father may have been exposed. He's refusing to evacuate. I need to know, if he was exposed an hour ago, what's the timeline? A long pause. Symptoms usually start within 30 to 40 minutes. If he's not showing signs by now, it's possible he wasn't infected, or possible the exposure dose was too low to trigger immediate symptoms. Or possible it's just taking longer. Yes. Through the phone, I could hear voices shouting, helicopters, the organized chaos of crisis response that was already too late. What's happening out there? The contamination radius hit the town of Victoria about 20 minutes ago. Population 800. We've had reports of mass casualties. Vickers' voice was strained. Grant, Federal Command, is considering a strategic firebreak. A firebreak, you mean? Control burns, prairie fires, set deliberately to create a barrier the contamination can't cross. They're planning to ignite a line from Gorham South to Rush Center, maybe 40 miles total. Everything east of that line becomes a containment zone. That's half of Ellis County. Thousands of people are already dead or dying. The infection rate is near 100% in exposed populations. The burns will start in 3 hours, with or without full evacuation. I looked at Dad's house, the peeling paint, the crooked fence, the wheat fields that stretched to the horizon. My grandfather had built this place with his own hands during the Depression. Dad had been born in the front bedroom. Mom had died in the same room 67 years later. How long until the fires reach Hayes? 5 to 6 hours, depending on wind. 5 hours. I did the math. If Dad was infected, he'd show symptoms long before then. If he wasn't, I'm staying with him, I said. We'll shelter in place, ride it out. Grant, if the fire reaches you, then we'll have bigger problems than Prion. I hung up before he could argue. Inside, Dad had made coffee, proper coffee, not the burnt garbage from the Speedway. He poured 2 cups, handed me one, and settled into his recliner like this was just another morning. So he said, "How bad is it really?" I told him everything. The derailment, the agrigenesis cargo, the contamination spreading across the prairie like a plague from the Old Testament. The strategic firebreaks that would turn half the county into ash. The quarantine that was already sealing us in. He listened without interrupting, sipping his coffee, and when I finished he was quiet for a long time. Your grandfather used to say the plains would outlast all of us, he finally said. Every drought, every dust storm, every time the banks try to take the land, he'd say the same thing. The plains don't care about our problems. They'll be here long after we're gone. He smiled, sad and distant. Guess he was right. We're not dead yet. No, but if I start showing symptoms, the rash, the confusion, you need to leave me here. Get yourself out while you still can. I'm not. Grant. His voice was firm, the same tone he'd used when I was 16 and thought I knew everything. I've had a good life. A long one. You've got years left. Don't waste them trying to save a stubborn old man who's already lived too long. I wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him he was being dramatic, that we'd figure something out, that modern medicine would swoop in with a cure and everything would be fine. But I'd seen Chen's face. I'd heard the screams from the contaminated workers. I knew how this story ended. So instead, I said, "Okay, Dad, but until then, we're staying together." He nodded, satisfied, and turned on the television. The emergency broadcasts were everywhere now. At 4:47 a.m., Dad developed a fever. I noticed it when he stood to refill his coffee and swayed, catching himself on the kitchen counter. His face had gone pale, beaded with sweat despite the cool morning air. "Dad, I'm fine. Just stood up too fast." But I could see it now, that same look Shun had before she collapsed. Eyes slightly unfocused, pupils dilated. And when he rolled up his sleeve to check the time, I saw the first traces of red along his inner wrist. The rash. "Sit down," I said, guiding him back to the recliner. "When did you start feeling off?" "Maybe 20 minutes ago. Thought it was just the coffee hitting wrong." He examined his wrist, turning it in the lamplight. "That's not good, is it?" "No." I grabbed my phone, but who was I going to call? The hospitals were overwhelmed. The emergency response teams were 50 miles away, dealing with hundreds of victims. Even if I could get through, what would they do? There was no treatment, no cure. Just supportive care and hope. "Grant." Dad's voice was steady, despite the tremor in his hands. "Remember what we talked about? I'm not leaving you. You have to." "No." I pulled up a chair, sat across from him. "We're doing this together. All of it." On the television, a news anchor with terrified eyes was reading from a prepared statement. "Military units have established a perimeter around the contaminated zone. Residents are advised to remain in their homes with all windows and doors sealed. Do not attempt to leave the quarantine area. Do not approach military personnel. Federal Emergency Management has authorized the use of controlled burns to prevent further spread." The screen cut to aerial footage. Even from helicopter height, the scope was staggering. Miles of prairie on fire, orange flames marching across the wheat fields like an invading army. Smoke pillars rose into the dawn sky, visible for 50 miles in every direction. "They're really doing it," Dad whispered, "burning it all down." I checked my phone. Multiple messages from Vickers. "Firebreak initiated 0415. Burn line advancing 2-mile shower. Haze evac window closing. You need to leave now." But looking at Dad, his skin flushed with fever, the rash creeping up his forearm toward his elbow, I knew we'd already lost the race. "Tell me about Grandpa," I said. "The Depression years. I want to hear the stories again." Dad smiled weakly. "You've heard them all 100 times. Tell me anyway." So he did. Told me about the year the wheat crop failed, and they survived on rabbit stew and wild onions. About the dust storms that blotted out the sun for days, turning noon into midnight. About my grandmother singing hymns in the kitchen while the world fell apart outside. "She never complained," he said, voice getting thready. "Not once. Just kept singing and cooking and holding the family together, like sheer force of what could fix everything." He coughed, a wet rattling sound. "Your mother was like that too. Both of you got that strength. Not for me." "Dad, let me finish." His eyes were bright now, feverish. "I wasn't always the best father. Worked too much. Drank too much after your mother died. Let you carry burdens you shouldn't have had to carry alone." The rash had spread to his neck now, vivid red against pale skin. "But I need you to know, everything I did, every stubborn decision, every time I refused help, it came from love. Maybe twisted, maybe wrong, but love." "I know, Dad. And what you're doing now, staying here when you could run, that's not stubbornness. That's love too." He reached out, gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Your mother would be proud. Hell, I'm proud." The rash reached his jaw. His breathing had gone shallow, rapid. I wanted to do something, call for help, find medicine, perform some miracle of engineering like I'd done 100 times with broken trains and failed systems. But human bodies weren't machines. You couldn't just replace a burnout part and get back on track. "Grant," he said, voice barely a whisper now. "The wheat. Check the wheat." "What?" "Outside. I need to see if it survived. I glanced toward the window. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. And beyond the glass, I could see the wheat field. Our wheat field, the one my grandfather had planted during the Depression and Dad had maintained for 60 years. It was dying. The stalks had turned black, twisted, as if the contamination had reached down into the roots and corrupted everything from the inside out. Patches of decay spread across the field like lesions, and where the morning light touched them, I could see something moving, writhing, almost. The prion, still active, still spreading, turning the earth itself into something unnatural. "It's gone, Dad. The field is gone." He nodded, unsurprised. "Good. Better it burns than spreads." His eyes found mine, still lucid despite the fever consuming him. "Promise me something. Anything. When they burn this place, when the fires come, you let happen. Don't try to save the house. Don't try to preserve anything. Just let it all turn to ash. Clean slate. Dad, promise me." "I promise." He smiled, satisfied, and closed his eyes. His breathing had become irregular now, long pauses between breaths. The rash covered his entire face, angry red welts that looked painful even in the gentle dawn light. I held his hand and waited. At 5:23 a.m., Dad stopped breathing. I sat with him for another hour, just holding his hand, listening to the helicopters overhead and the distant crackle of approaching flames. The house, our house, felt hollow now, like all the warmth had left with his last breath. My phone buzzed. "Vickers fire 1 mile north of your location. If you're still there, you need to leave immediately." I looked at Dad's body, peaceful in the recliner. Looked at the dying wheat field outside. Looked at the photographs on the wall. 3 generations of Whitakers staring back at me. Ghosts of men who'd carved a life from this unforgiving land. Then I grabbed the gasket from the garage. Dad had always kept it full. One of his Depression-era habits. Never let the tank run dry. Never be caught without fuel. I walked through the house, splashing gasoline across the kitchen floor, the living room, the bedroom where my mother had died. Not to destroy evidence, not to hide anything, just to honor a promise. Clean slate. I dragged Dad's body outside, away from the house, and laid him in the wheat field he'd tended for 60 years. It seemed wrong to leave him inside when the fire came. He'd spent his whole life outdoors, farming, fixing fences, watching storms roll across the plains. Let it be part of the land one last time. The smoke was visible now, a black wall advancing from the north. I could hear the fire's roar, that deep bass rumble that sounded like the earth itself was screaming. I lit a rag, tossed it through the kitchen window, and watched my childhood home ignite. The flames spread fast, eager, consuming everything they touched. Photographs curled and blackened. Furniture collapsed into ash. The roof groaned and fell inward with a shower of sparks that looked like dying stars. And I stood there, watching it burn, thinking about my grandfather who'd built this place with his bare hands. About Dad, who'd never left despite droughts and dust storms and market crashes that would have broken weaker men. About my mother, singing hymns while the world fell apart. About me, the last Whitaker standing on Whitaker land, watching it all turn to smoke. My phone rang. I almost didn't answer. "Whitaker." Vickers sounded exhausted. "I'm tracking your location. The fire's going to overrun your position in less than 15 minutes. There's an emergency evac helicopter 3 miles south. Last chance extraction before the burn line closes. Can you make it?" I looked at Dad's body, peaceful among the dying wheat. Looked at the house, now nothing but flames and memory. Looked at the field where my grandfather had planted hope during the Depression and somehow made it grow. "Yeah," I said, "I can make it." "Run." The helicopter lifted off at 6:47 a.m., just as the firewall reached Dad's property line. From 500 feet up, I watched the flames consume everything. The house, the barn, the wheat field, the fence line my grandfather had built stone by stone. All of it turning to ash and smoke. The pilot, in National Guard by his uniform, didn't try to make conversation. He'd probably already extracted a dozen terrified farmers today, all of them watching their lives burn. What was there to say? We flew south, away from the contamination zone, passing over the firebreak line that stretched from horizon to horizon. Behind it, the prairie was burning. Ahead, National Guard units were setting up containment camps, processing refugees, trying to maintain some kind of order in the chaos. The helicopter touched down in a parking lot that had been converted into a triage center. Hayes High School. Ironically, I graduated from here in '85, back when my biggest worry was whether Jenny Patterson would go to prom with me. A medic in a hazmat suit approached as soon as my feet hit asphalt. Were you exposed to the contaminated area? My father was. He died about 2 hours ago. The medic's expression softened behind his face shield. I'm sorry. We're going to need to test you, run some blood work, make sure you're not showing symptoms. Standard protocol. Standard protocol. Everything was protocol now. I let them lead me to a decontamination tent, strip me down, spray me with chemicals that smelled like industrial bleach mixed with desperation. Then came the blood draw, the physical exam, the questions about when I'd last been in the contamination zone and what I'd touched and whether I was feeling dizzy, feverish, confused. You're clean, the medic finally said. No signs of infection. You're one of the lucky ones. Lucky, right? They gave me surgical scrubs to wear and directed me to the processing area, a gymnasium full of cots where survivors sat in various states of shock, staring at nothing. I found an empty cot in the corner and collapsed onto it, suddenly aware of how tired I was. 28 hours without sleep, most of them spent hauling freight, watching my father die, or running from fire. My phone had 4% battery left. I scrolled through the news. Kansas outbreak death toll exceeds 2,000. Federal quarantine expanded to 3 counties. CDC confirms prion-based pathogen. Agrigensis faces criminal investigation. The numbers kept climbing. Every update, the death toll rose. 2,000, 3,000. Entire towns evacuated or burned. Livestock slaughtered by the tens of thousands as a precaution. The governor had declared a state of emergency. The president was considering deploying active duty military. And somewhere in the middle of all that bureaucratic nightmare, my father had died in his recliner, holding my hand, asking me to check the wheat one last time. Whitaker. I looked up. Vickers stood at the edge of my cot, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His suit was rumpled, tie loosened, and there was ash on his collar. Tom, I tried to sit up, but exhaustion dragged at me. What are you doing here? Coordinating with federal response. Making sure BNSF's ass is covered legally while people die from our cargo. He pulled over a folding chair and sat heavily. I heard about your father. I'm sorry. Yeah. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. Staying with him. The right thing would have been not hauling mystery cargo in the first place. Vickers flinched. You're not wrong. Corporate's already lawyering up, trying to shift blame to agrigenesis. But between you and me, we knew. Maybe not the specifics, but we knew there were risks. And we hauled it anyway because the contract was worth $30 million. $30 million. That's what Dad's life was worth. That's what 2,000 lives were worth. A line item in a corporate budget. They're going to ask you to testify, Vickers continued. Federal investigation, probably criminal charges against both BNSF and agrigenesis. You were there. You saw everything. I'll testify. It won't bring them back. Your father, Dr. Chun, all those farmers. Nothing we say in a courtroom will undo what happened. No, but maybe it'll stop the next catastrophe. I met his eyes. How many other trains are running right now, carrying cargo, we don't fully understand how many other experimental chemicals are sitting in rail yards, waiting for the wrong combination of circumstances to turn them into weapons. Vickers had no answer to that. They kept me in the processing center for 3 days, running tests, asking questions, documenting everything for the federal investigation. On the second day, they let me watch a memorial service on a portable TV, a mass funeral for the outbreak victims, broadcast live from Topeka. Dad's name was on the list, listed alphabetically between Whitaker, Gerald M., and Williams, Jennifer A. Just another casualty, another statistic in the biggest agricultural disaster in American history. I wanted to feel something, grief, anger, anything, but I was numb, hollowed out, running on empty. On the third day, Vickers returned with news the fire breaks worked. Contamination is contained. Burn zone covers approximately 300 square miles, but it stopped the spread. 300 square miles, an area larger than some states, turned to ash and char. What about survivors? 4,000 evacuated successfully. Estimated casualties around 3,000 confirmed dead, another 500 missing presumed dead. He showed me his tablet, aerial photos of the burn zone. Nothing but black earth and skeletal remains of buildings. They're calling it the Iron Plains now. The fire burned so hot it vitrified the topsoil in some areas, turned it to glass. Iron Plains, where wheat used to grow, where families used to farm, where my grandfather had somehow carved out a life during the Depression. What happens now, I asked. The zone stays quarantined for at least 2 years while they study the contamination breakdown rate. After that, maybe remediation is possible. Maybe not. The CDC is still trying to understand how AG-17 interacts with soil bacteria and groundwater. Vickers put the tablet away. The land might be dead for decades, or it might recover. Nobody knows. I thought about Dad's last words, let it all turn to ash. Clean slate. Maybe that's what the plains needed. A reset. Burn away the contamination, the mistakes, the corporate greed that had turned experimental livestock feed into a plague. Start over from nothing, like my grandfather had done in 1933. They're releasing you this afternoon, Vickers said. You'll need to check in with the CDC every 2 weeks for the next 6 months, standard exposure protocol. And there's going to be a lot of lawyers who want to talk to you. Where am I supposed to go? My house burned. My father's dead. Everything I owned was in that evacuation zone. BNSF is providing temporary housing for displaced employees. There's an apartment complex in Salina, where the train had started, where I'd met Dr. Chun and her doomed cargo. No, not there. Then where? I thought about it. Thought about the years I'd spent hauling freight across the plains, never really going anywhere, just running the same routes over and over like a hamster on a wheel. Thought about Dad's stubborn refusal to leave his land, even when the land was killing him. Thought about 3 generations of Whitakers who'd planted roots so deep they couldn't be pulled up, only burned away. Somewhere else, I said. Anywhere else. They released me at 4 p.m. on a Thursday, gave me a check for $5,000 in emergency assistance funds, and sent me on my way. No ceremony, no fanfare. Just another refugee from the Iron Plains, carrying everything I owned in a plastic grocery bag. I hitched a ride to Salina with a National Guard convoy, then caught a Greyhound heading east. Didn't have a destination in mind, just picked a direction and started moving. The bus rolled through Kansas night, and I watched the darkness slide past the window. Somewhere out there, the burn zone was still smoldering. Somewhere out there, my father's body lay in a field of ash. Somewhere out there, the wheat that my grandfather had planted during the Depression was now nothing but carbon and memory. My phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Mr. Whitaker, this is Agent Sarah Reeves with the FBI. We need to schedule a time to discuss your testimony regarding the agrigenesis incident. Please call me at your earliest convenience. I turned off the phone. The bus stopped in Topeka around midnight. I got off, found a motel that took cash and didn't ask questions, and collapsed onto a bed that smelled like cigarettes and industrial cleaner. In my dreams, I was back in the engine of the 2319, feeling the tracks vibrate wrong beneath me. But this time, when the derailment came, I couldn't stop it. The train kept going, faster and faster, carrying its poison cargo across the endless plains while behind us the wheat turned black and the sky filled with smoke. I woke at 3 a.m., sweating, and couldn't fall back asleep. 6 months later, they held the first hearing. Federal courthouse in Wichita, packed with lawyers, journalists, and families of the victims. I sat in the witness box for 7 hours, answering questions about track conditions, cargo protocols, and the moment I realized we were hauling something that could kill thousands of people. The agrigenesis lawyers tried to paint me as negligent, claimed I should have known something was wrong with the cargo, should have questioned the refrigeration requirements, should have stopped the train before the derailment. But the BNSF lawyers had my back, presented maintenance records showing the track had been inspected 2 weeks prior and cleared for freight, showed that the cargo manifest listed AG-17 as experimental livestock supplement, class 6.2 infectious substances, but provided no specific hazard information beyond standard biohazard protocols. In the end, the judge ruled that neither the engineer nor the railroad could reasonably have prevented the disaster. The fault lay with agrigenesis for inadequate containment design and for failing to disclose the true nature of AG-17's risks. Criminal charges were filed against 3 agrigenesis executives. Civil lawsuits followed, hundreds of them, seeking damages for wrongful death, property loss, and environmental catastrophe. I testified in 14 different hearings over the next 2 years. Each time, I told the same story: the vibrating tracks, the derailment, Dr. Chen's face as the rash spread, Dad's last breaths in his recliner while the world burned around us. And each time, when they asked me if there was anything I would have done differently, I gave the same answer. I would have spent more time with my father when I had the chance. The Iron Plains stayed quarantined for 5 years. I followed the news obsessively at first. Reports of prion decay rates, soil remediation efforts, debates about whether the land would ever be safe for farming again. The CDC ran experiments, planted test crops, monitored the groundwater. After 3 years, they announced that the contamination had degraded to safe levels in most areas. After 4 years, they began allowing former residents to return to assess their properties. I didn't go back. What was there to return to the house was ash. The barn was ash. The wheat field my grandfather had planted was glass and char. Even if the land was technically safe, it would never be home again. Instead, I took a job as a freight inspector in St. Louis. Not engineering, not hauling cargo, just checking manifests, verifying hazard labels, making sure that what goes on the train is actually what the paperwork claims. Boring work, safe work. Sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd pull up satellite images of the old property. The house foundation was still visible, a black rectangle against the recovering grassland. The fence line had survived, though the posts were charred. And if you looked closely, you could still see the outline of the wheat field, a slightly darker green where new growth struggled to cover the scars. The plains were healing. Slowly, imperfectly, but healing. 7 years after the outbreak, I got a letter from Ellis County. They were holding a memorial dedication, a permanent monument to the victims of the Iron Plains disaster. 3,000 names carved in black granite, arranged in a circle around a piece of vitrified soil from the burn zone. The ceremony would be held on the anniversary of the derailment, with speeches from survivors, families, and officials promising it would never happen again. They wanted me to speak. I almost said no. What could I possibly say that hadn't already been said in 100 courtrooms and congressional hearings? What words could make sense of a disaster that never should have happened? But then I thought about Dad asking me to check the wheat one last time. Thought about my grandfather singing hymns while the dust storms raged. Thought about 3 generations of Whitakers who'd learned how to endure on those stubborn plains. I said yes. The memorial sat on a hillside overlooking what used to be Hayes, now mostly rebuilt, though smaller, with a more cautious population that knew exactly how fragile civilization really was. The black granite circle was exactly as described, 3,000 names catching the late afternoon light. I found Dad's name on the northwest curve. Whitaker, Robert James, 1947 to 2025. There was space next to it, intentionally left blank, I realized. Room for future generations. Room for me. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd. Survivors, families, officials. People who'd lost everything and somehow kept going anyway. My grandfather used to say the plains would outlast all of us. I began. He was right. The wheat died. The soil turned to glass. 3,000 people lost their lives. But the plains endured. They always do. I glanced at the vitrified soil at the center of the memorial. A chunk of earth turned to black glass by heat that shouldn't have existed, by fire that burned away everything except memory. We can't undo what happened. We can't bring back the dead or restore what was lost. But we can learn. We can be more careful. We can ask harder questions before we haul mystery cargo across the heartland. We can choose caution over profit and safety over convenience. The words felt inadequate, too small for the enormity of what we'd lost. But they were all I had. My father died holding my hand, asking me to check the wheat one last time. And when I looked, it was dying, corrupted from the inside out by something we thought we could control. That's the lesson. Some things can't be controlled. Some risks aren't worth taking. And some land is too precious to gamble with. I stepped away from the podium, and they played taps while the sun set over the recovering prairie. Afterward, I walked to where the old property line used to be. The landmarks were gone. House, barn, fence, but I knew the land well enough to find it anyway. The wheat had grown back, wild and uneven, but growing nonetheless. I knelt and ran my fingers through the soil. It felt normal, warm from the sun, slightly sandy, smelling of earth and life. No trace of the contamination that had killed thousands. No hint of the fire that had burned for days. Clean slate like Dad had wanted. I stayed there until dark, sitting in the wheat field where my grandfather had planted hope during the Depression, where my father had spent his life maintaining something bigger than himself, where I learned that some bonds can't be broken, not by distance, not by divorce, not even by fire. The plains would outlast all of us. But while we were here, we'd mattered. We built something, and maybe that was enough. I drove back to St. Louis the next morning, back to my safe, boring job checking manifests and verifying hazard labels. Back to a life that would never include hauling freight or smelling burnt penny coffee at midnight or calling Dad to remind him about his medications. But sometimes when I couldn't sleep, I'd pull up those satellite images of the old property, and I'd swear I could see new growth where the wheat field used to be, still scarred, still recovering, but growing toward the light. The plains endure. They always do. And so, somehow do we.